I was originally considering calling this video the 10 juiciest magic cards from Theros Beyond Death, and then I started to think about how gross and weird it would be if magic cards actually produced juice. And after that tangent, I decided, you know what, let's just go with the 10 most expensive cards from Theros. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to talk about some exciting, fun, some brand new cards from Theros Beyond Death, specifically the 10 most valuable cards from the set. Now, if you can hear that kind of grinding, humming noise in the background, whatever it is, that's unfortunately my computer. It's gonna be a while before I can get it sorted out. I'm gonna try and noise gate it out though, so I mean, who knows? Maybe you won't notice and I'll look like a crazy person. And honestly, I'm all right with that. I'm okay with looking like a crazy person if it means the sound quality is better. But sorry about that, my friends. This is a channel with a very small budget. I'm not a rich dude. If you want to help out, feel free to hop on my Patreon or channel membership or something. That definitely helps. But for the time being, we shall muddle through. It is kind of funny to think about making a video about the most expensive cards from a set while dealing with having this kind of an issue at the same time. It's funny to think about how luxury Magic the Gathering is. But let us dive in, my friends. Let's start talking about card number 10 on the list, which is Theros Bronze Blooded. Interestingly enough, most of the cards on this list actually got individual spoiler cards videos where I dived into the flavor and everything like that. 70% of the cards we're going to talk about ended up in a video on my channel already. So I'll put a link at the end of the video to that single card spoiler playlist. That way, if you want to get more in-depth flavor talk about these particular cards or what I think about them overall, you can do so. Number 10 on the list is Theros Bronze Blooded, and we're just dealing with cards that are $10 and above. And interestingly enough, the cutoff was at the top 10 cards. Now, I do want to make a note as well that this list is going to be dominated by mythics. There is something going on with the price of regular rares in newer sets like Theros, and I think it's tied, honestly, to collector's packs, but we'll discuss that in a future video. If you want to see that, make sure you click on the subscribe button if you're not subscribed, and also give the video a like while you're here. See if I ever actually get around to talking about what the video's about. So, Theros Bronze Blooded. 1 red and 4 for a 7/6 indestructible legendary god. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Theros isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste. 1 red and 2. You may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So you've got a pretty powerful setup here. I mean, you only have to have 5 devotion to turn Theros into an actual active creature. He's 7/6, which is incredibly beefy. He gives all your dudes haste, and you can actually slap out creatures on the cheap and artifacts. So this is one actually dependent on the environment. I could see this one going down in value and maybe being knocked off of the top 10 list. But if the right card show up, he could lead to some gross, dumb nonsense. You could do silly things with him and Ilharg, where basically you could put Ilharg out, attack with it, and slap another creature out. So for 3 mana, you can actually be getting a surprising amount of value. The fact that he lets you put them into play for cheap and gives them haste is pretty gross overall. This sneak attack style god is definitely potent. And oh, I don't know if you guys could hear the noise before, but the computer's calmed down. Thank you, computer gods, for giving me some silence. Let us talk about someone who has returned from the silence of the land of the dead. And that is card number 9, Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis, wielding the crazy Shadow Crusaor, basically the shadow, like, nightmare spear that she was able to steal from Heliod through people's belief. If you don't know about that, I've got a video on the channel with the entire story of Theros summarized, or Theros Beyond Death. So if you want to know how she managed to get this shadow spear, you can check that video out. I'll link it at the end there. So 2 white, 2 colors for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. -1, up to 2 target creatures you control each get +2/+1 to end a turn. -2, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. -3, you gain 5 life. It also has escape for 2 white and 4. Exile 4 other cards from your graveyard and you may cast her from your graveyard, bringing her back. I love the flavor on this card. You can see the rent in her armor where she was stabbed by Heliod. This is her returning for her vengeance against Heliod, which admittedly, honestly, because of the lack of story, felt a little underwhelming. I don't know exactly what happened with the story, but I've heard rumblings that there was actually a book written and Wizards decided to shelve it because they figured the reaction to not having a story would go over better than actually having a story. It might have been written by the guy who made the War of the Spark novel, so that might be why. But returning to the card itself, Elspeth looks like Wonder Woman. I do not like her hair and headpiece. Other than that, this armor is actually fantastic, and the spear looks incredible. It may just be dripping Phyrexian oil, right? Because we find out in the story that Ashiok actually heads off to seek out the Phyrexians after watching Elspeth's dreams, because Ashiok has some interest in fear. But we can talk about Ashiok a little further when we get to her in the list. Now, this card overall, Elspeth, she feels like she might be more powerful than she appears at first glance. I have to admit that sometimes I underrate cards when I see them. And when I first saw her, I was kind of like, meh. But I also severely underrated Oko. So that shows you what I know, right? Anyways, this Elspeth seems like it might actually have some genuine potential because of the fact that you can keep recurring it. In some kind of, oh no, computer, calm down, don't go grindy again. In some kind of slow rolling control deck, I could see you getting her out multiple times, and across multiple castings, you can get a lot of value out of this card. So this is one that actually feels like it might edge up in the rankings. Number 8 is Nyx Lotus. Now, this is one that a lot of Commander EDH players are going to be all over. This actually feels like a card that over time is going to become more valuable. It might dip down a little at the beginning as supply starts to go out there. People open collector's boosters and regular boosters, and the supply of these increases. It might drop down a bit in value, but this feels like over the long run, one of those cards that is going to continue to move upwards in value because it's really powerful and it can go into a lot of different decks. 4 to put out, it comes into play tapped. Tap it, choose a color, add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. And your devotion to a color is the number of mana symbols that you have of that color out in play. So, you know, if you had like a creature that had 2 red mana symbols out and that was the only red card you had out, then your devotion is 2. But you can see how this card would start to produce insane amounts of mana fairly rapidly. And the artwork is absolutely awesome. The idea of essentially a black lotus that has been infused with the essence of the gods makes for a very, very cool card. But again, this is one that I feel is going to trend upwards over time. It's the kind of card you're going to want to snag while it's in print because there's only 2 cards that really have this ability. And one of them is a land that's already really heavily valued by people. So this card has a lot of future, future growth price-wise, in my opinion. Moving on to the next card, we've got number 7 on the list, and that's Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. Oh, the Titans are so cool, man. I did a video on the 2 Titans. It's unfortunately we're only getting 2 Titans, but I can also understand why they didn't want to put too many out there because they're fairly powerful. So 1 red, 1 black. When Kroxa enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. Whenever Kroxa enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card. Then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. So if the wording is a little bit confusing to you, because it does seem to trip some people up, this makes anybody who discarded a card that was a land or anybody who didn't discard a card at all, it makes them, either of those scenarios is a lose 3 life scenario. Some people think like, oh no, it's just like if I don't discard a card, nothing happens. No. That's not how this works. It's a little bit weird with the wording, but overall, a very solid card. And it escapes for 2 black and 2 red and exiling 5 other cards from your graveyard. Again, another escape card that can give you continuous recurring value. And this card is great because you can play it originally essentially almost as a pseudo sorcery to get that discard effect and then play it again later. And it feeds itself into the graveyard to escape. The artwork is amazing. This thing is essentially just made up of tons of mouths and teeth, and it eats and destroys not because not because he's like endlessly hungry and it actually fills his belly. He eats because it's his nature. His nature is to destroy. He is basically like the incarnation of death. And this incarnation of death is constantly hungry for any form of life that it can get regardless and will never stop. And the black miasma that's leaking up off of him, the chains that are hanging from around him indicating his freedom from his essentially is captured down in the underworld, right? Because Clothis went ahead and bound the Titans down in the underworld. So it's very cool. This card is very, very cool. Moving on. As I said, we would talk more about Ashiok. We shall, because Ashiok is number 6. That is 1 black, 1 blue, and 3 for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. +1, create a 2/2 blue and black nightmare creature token with whenever this creature attacks or blocks, each opponent exiles the top 2 cards of the library. -3, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then that player exiles a card from their hand. And -7, you may cast up to 3 face-up cards your opponent owns from exile without paying their mana cost. So this is a pretty potent planeswalker overall. I didn't do a video about this one during spoiler season, but I had genuinely considered it. So the first ability not only actually generates you a creature that can be used to block and protect Ashiok, but it actually also mills your opponent, but it mills him into exile, which is even stronger than regular mill. And then the -3, where you can just bounce a permanent and make them discard, that's pretty insane. Essentially, that's a recoil effect. We had a card from Invasion called Recoil that did the same thing. And then the ultimate is interesting because it doesn't seem that powerful at first, because you're like, okay, wait, -7 just to play 3 face-up cards and they have to be exiled. But you're going to get to play the 3 best cards you've exiled from your opponent's deck and play them for free. That's pretty potent. And Ashiok in the story has just learned about the Phyrexians through the nightmares of Elspeth. And because Ashiok is essentially a connoisseur of fear and also able to use fear to turn it into power, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if Ashiok does manage to encounter the Phyrexians. Are we going to see a return of Phyrexia, which would be pretty cool in all honesty, because the Phyrexians are one of the longest running villains. Actually, not one of. They are the longest running villains in Magic the Gathering, going all the way back basically to Antiquities, which is just crazy because that's like 1993. That's technically a little bit before I started playing. Antiquities is the expansion that was released before I started playing. The 3rd expansion that came out was Legends, and I started playing when Legends came out because I am both old and legendary. Speaking of legendary, let's take a look at the Dryad of Elysian Grove, because this is card number 5 on our list, and it is legendary both in terms of its power and its artwork. All right, so let's talk about the card before I take a moment for the artwork on this ridiculous looking card. Okay, 1 green and 2 get you a 2/4 nymph. Ew, he's a little nymph. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. The flavor text says, Vine Wreath, he nurtures life among the dead. I don't honestly quite get how his flavor text ties into his ability, but whatever. I mean, that's not really relevant. Overall, this is a powerful card. The fact that he ramps you up and solves all your mana problems at once, and it's cool because he's an enchantment creature, and we've had an enchantment before in Magic where basically lands you control are every basic land type. So that is a funky little like, hey, look, I'm an enchantment just like this, but I'm also a creature. And we've had multiple creatures that let you play additional lands, and I mean enchantments as well. So this guy feels like an enchantment, but the artwork makes me laugh so hard. This guy is wearing like nothing. He is the Jolly Green Giant's like sexy nephew or something. He's covered in these throbbing, questionable vines. And I mean, if you get real close and you look at what he's growing in his hand, it's kind of wangalicious. You know what I mean? It's like, I have heard that you like to watch particular types of Japanese animation. Maybe ones that involve tentacle monsters? And I believe I may be able to make your dreams into a reality. I am just the nymph for you. The artwork on this card makes me genuinely laugh. That is just something. There's just something about the whole thing, man. The green nips, all of it. It makes me chuckle. Let us move on before I continue on about this. Number 4 on our list is Clothice, God of Destiny. A green, a red, and 1 for a 4/5 indestructible god, enchantment creature, as all the gods are. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, Clothice is not a creature. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a land card, add a red or a green. Otherwise, you gain 2 life, and Clothice deals 2 damage to each opponent. Honestly, I really enjoy this card concept. I like the fact that you can exile cards from graveyard. I mean, Clothice is the god of destiny, who's there to restore the weave of fate. And all these undead escaping from the underworld go against the destiny and fate that they had been sentenced to. So Clothice is essentially now exiling them completely from the weave, which is way more intense. And the fact that this works as both graveyard removal and also life gain or damage to your opponents is solid. The fact that it hits all opponents is crazy solid. You get a lot here for 3 mana. There's a reason that Clothice is right up in the rankings. And the artwork is amazing. The whole threads of destiny. I've done actually 2 videos on this. We did one where we speculated about Clothice before, when we just had the artwork and just kind of the name before we had any information about the card. And then I actually did a video talking about it when the card came out, because this one was worth a lot of discussion. So you can check those out if you're interested in hearing more about her. Let's move on to number 3, which is, for me, this is the most exciting card on the whole list, because I am a huge mono green boy, and Nyx Bloom Ancient, oh lordy, he makes me want to let the Dryad of Elysian Grove do dirty, dirty things to me. All right, so 3 green and 4 for a 5/5 trampler. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. 3 times! You get thrice what you asked for. I love it. Flavor text says, ancient yet ever young, it is wise and subtle, and cruel and reckless as the spring itself. So it's just this elemental, like, it's almost like a tree folk, right? And it's got all these, it looks like it has lotuses. It almost looks like it has like Nyxian lotuses blooming off of it. It's pretty neat, but it's insane, honestly. The whole concept of triple mana, absolutely crazy. I cannot wait to get these into my big green tower deck. Number 2, Heliod Suncrowned. Now, he might not have made his position if it wasn't for another card and his possible applications in Pioneer. But let's talk about the card, then we'll talk about that. 1 white and 2 for a 5/5 legendary god. He's indestructible. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. And for a white and a colorless, another target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. So this is Heliod we see right before he is defeated by Elspeth, because Elspeth ends up actually making his own spear shatter in his hands. Pretty cool little trick that she pulled to make it happen as well. So we have him here shown in a very majestic way. Honestly, I really like this artwork. I find it stands out. It's kind of funky how his flowing robe kind of looks like hills behind him. It makes him look like he's a part of the land, and that makes sense for a god. Now, in terms of one of the reasons he's probably so high on the list is because if you combine him with Walking Ballista, it's basically an instant win. Because Walking Ballista will allow you to remove a counter from it to do 1 damage to any target. And what you do is you just give it lifelink using Heliod's ability, remove a counter from it to do 1 damage to your opponent. As soon as you do that, Heliod triggers and says, oh, you gained a life, put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you want. I guess I'll put it on the Walking Ballista and remove it, and you just do it over and over and over. It's an infinite combo that can win you the game just outright with 2 cards. So I think that if it wasn't for the existence of the Walking Ballista combo, that Heliod would not be so high ranking. So I think you'll want to keep your eyes out in terms of valuation, because this combination is probably going to dominate in Pioneer. And once it does, Wizards will bring the ban hammer down on, most likely on the Walking Ballista, because Heliod is from a newer set. But regardless, the other part of the combo being removed makes him just okay. I mean, he's not a bad card, but without some kind of busted combo, I really don't think that he would be up at number 2. I don't even know if he would make the list. He might actually be one of the lower ranked mythics otherwise, right? Because not all the gods made it to this list. It's really only the red and white gods that made it to the top 10 list. So Heliod might have been relegated to the same level as like a Nylea or a Thassa if he didn't have that combo. And the final card that we're going to talk about, number 1, is the other Titan. Uro, whatever you want to pronounce it as. Titan of Nature's Wrath. 1 blue, 1 green, 1 colorless for a 6/6. When he enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. When he enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And he escapes for 2 green and 2 blue. Now, I did a video talking about both of these Titans and the sort of like reflection of each other they are, the forces that they represent, went in depth with the artwork and all that goodness. So if you want to watch that in the spoiler list video, you can do so. I won't go on over long about his artwork, but he does look like a storm at sea, right? He's got that sort of natural feel to him. I really, really enjoy the artwork. The green-blue gives him the feeling of like a maritime storm for sure. So, overall, it makes sense why he would be at the top of the list. The fact is just, you can play him for 3 mana. Originally, you're going to get 3 life, draw a card, and put a land out. So he's going to accelerate you by giving you card advantage, by accelerating how much land you have out, and life. He hits 3 different points all in a beneficial manner. And then you can bring him out, and it's a repeatable effect every turn. This is the kind of card that if it's not answered quickly, the amount of advantage that he gives you mounts up so quickly that it becomes absurd. If you look at the other Titan, yes, he does make your opponent discard, and they lose 3 life if they don't. But that's it. So Kroxa basically turns into, once their hand's empty, just whenever this guy attacks, your opponent loses 3 life. Whereas this one goes, whenever I attack, draw a card, gain 3 life, lay a land if you want. And that is a high level of power. I am unsurprised to see this guy at the top, and I actually wouldn't be surprised to see him push even higher after he proves himself in actual standard play. And theoretically, he might be powerful enough to move outside of standard into other formats as well. So this is one I wouldn't be surprised at all to see staying at the top of the ranks, even moving more upwards. Again, these are just my opinions, right? Bear in mind that nothing that I say is absolute. I don't determine the markets, but that is how I feel about these cards. So, my friends, let me know what you think about these rankings. What do you think is going to move up? What do you think is going to move down? And what do you think is in the proper space for itself now? Are there any cards that you thought should be on the top 10 list that didn't make it based on the current market prices? I am interested to hear what you have to say. Now, I want to give a big shout out, thank you to all my patrons and channel members for supporting what I do here. It does mean a lot, especially when stuff like when my computer acts up and I realize I got to do replacements. I really appreciate having the support on the channel. So thank you for those of you who do that, and for anybody who's not currently considering getting on board with the best ballers on the planet, because that's who my patrons and channel members are. Now, I'm going to leave links here at the end of the video for you for the spoiler playlist, talking about a bunch of different Theros cards. I'll put up one here specifically for a funny video I did on my other channel. They may not be wherever I'm waving, but they'll be on the screen, and you're smart enough to figure it out. So don't waste my time, all right? Thanks for coming out, and remember, together, we are the 6th color of magic.